I don't know if you guys noticed how many tornadoes has been going on over the United States. I think the number was like something crazy high, and it tied or was second to a record on how many tornadoes. There was one particular big one, and I showed a picture of it last week. There was another one, I guess, that was up in Iowa or Indiana, and I don't know about you, but I'm just always interested in tornadoes. I mean, I love them. You know, I remember when I was a kid, I was absolutely scared to death of storms. And I guess I have sort of coped with that as an adult by just loving storms now. I mean, there's a tornado warning. I do what everybody else does when the sirens go off. I go outside. You know, I want to see it. And so I'm watching videos and there's this gigantic huge tornado, maybe a mile wide, and it is in front of the vehicle that's got the camera. So I'm watching this video, and this vehicle is traveling toward the tornado. Now, I don't know about you, but for some reason that seems a little off, you know, that you should maybe once you get, if it's pretty close, maybe don't drive toward it. But I'm watching them, and they're actually driving. I mean, I'm watching the road go by, and after a while, I'm starting to think, now, wait, hold on, guys, what are you doing? You know, I wondered what kind of video I was getting ready to see. You know, is this going to be a video where the truck gets sucked up into the air? I didn't know. I mean, I was starting to talk back to the TV screen as I was watching it. I thought they were going to go underneath the stupid thing. And as somebody who's been way too close to being underneath a tornado before, that's not a really good place to be. It's really not. I mean, I've been really close to being underneath a tornado, and it's just, it's very, very scary. You have to take those winds kind of seriously. I mean, it looks kind of neat, but you want to take them seriously. I saw somebody else who didn't take something seriously. If you've ever been to Yellowstone, you know that they have wild animals there. You probably know that from time to time, one of those wild animals will injure or even kill someone. It happens, and they give warnings for those kinds of things. You know, they tell you to keep back, especially from certain animals like grizzly bears or buffalo. Don't take a selfie next to a buffalo in Yellowstone. Don't do that. She made national news because of this, because everybody was like, wait, you've got to take these animals seriously. They are actually dangerous. And sometimes I guess we relax a little bit. Sometimes we don't think about the danger and how close it might be. And I wonder, and I think sometimes we're sort of in that position when it comes to God, that we get so familiar with talking about God, we get so familiar about the stories about God, we get so familiar of just being kind of close to Him, that we sort of don't always take seriously how powerful and how serious it would be to stand before Him. In Exodus chapter 15, which is where we're going to be spending most of our time today, in Exodus chapter 15, the Israelites sort of memorialize the crossing of the Red Sea by writing a song about it. In ancient times, you win a battle, you're going to write a song about it. You're going to celebrate what just happened, and you're going to celebrate who just got the victory, and you're going to do all that, and you're going to write a song about it. And the Bible's got a few of those. When God gives them a great big victory one way or another, they write a song about it. In Exodus chapter 15, they've just crossed the Red Sea. They write a song about it. They're going to be talking about what God just did, because they had watched God do this incredible miracle. But He didn't just part the Red Sea. That wasn't the only thing that He did. I mean, and that's usually kind of where my mind goes. When I think about what God did at the Red Sea, I have this picture of the water parting. But the other side of that was that when the Egyptians pursued Him, He brought the water back together, and He drowned the entire military force of the Egyptians, 600 chariots plus 600 of their best chariots plus a bunch of others, and all their best officers. And let me tell you, if you were an Egyptian, that was a lot more frightening. If you were an Egyptian, that wasn't the best day in the world. That was just absolutely terrifying what had just happened. And they had seen it. And if you read chapter 14, there's a couple of times where there's just some sobering things that it just sort of says in passing. In chapter 14, it says that they saw the bodies of the soldiers washing up on shore. I mean, as cool as that was, and we tell that story to kids, there was a really serious part of that story. A lot of people died. A lot of people died in that. It was a moment where God gave them victory, but He gave them victory by destroying an entire military force made up of real people. And so when the Israelites made a song about it in chapter 15, there's some serious things about this song, because there's some awesome and somewhat slightly scary things about God that they had just witnessed at the Red Sea. And I want to just suggest this morning that taking a serious view of God means that we're going to grapple with a God who can bring destruction, with a God who has power over all of creation, and with a God who will execute judgment as the ultimate ruler, Lord, God of the universe. And we want to be right with Him. And not just right in the sense that we believe the right things, or that we're doing the right things and going to the right church and all those kinds of things, but we want to be right with God, that we're okay with Him, that He's okay with us. We want to take Him seriously, because He's the kind of God we should take seriously. I think a lot of times it is really easy to think that this idea that we should take God seriously applies to other people, but not so much us. I mean, a lot of times if I'll preach a sermon, sometimes somebody will come up to me and say, "Boy, I wish so-and-so was here. You know, they really needed to hear that." Are you sure you didn't? Are you sure that maybe God wanted you to hear it? We condemn other groups of people a lot of times, and we get caught up in that sometimes online and in the media. We get caught up just condemning other groups of people as if we're perfect, and we're not. As if we don't have anything to be frightened of if we stood before the throne of the judgment of God ourselves. Just this week, a guy pointed out that worldly people online, I think it was on Twitter, he pointed out that worldly people were going to face judgment. And he threw up a Bible verse in that. He threw up a Bible verse. It was Romans chapter 1, verse 32. And it says that although they knew God's just sentence, that those who practice such things deserve to die. I mean, the Bible had just listed a whole bunch of sins. Had just listed a whole bunch right there in that particular chapter. And it just, in fact, the previous verses, just a whole list of them. And he says, although they knew God's just sentence, that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but even applaud others who practice them. And he threw that, the gentleman threw that online, on Twitter, because he was telling other people how God was going to judge them. And it's easy for us to do that. It's hard for us sometimes to read the next sentence. The next sentence, which says, therefore every one of you who judges is without excuse, for when you judge another, you condemn yourself, since you, the judge, do the same things. That's the next sentence. We're kind of all in the same boat, standing before God completely unworthy. We need to take Him seriously. It's easy to think that it applies to somebody else, but we need to be right with God. I think sometimes we either think that God's going to judge other people, or we just get really comfortable with a picture of God as if He's happy with us and the way that we are right now. And you'll even hear people say, well, God made me this way. God created me this way. Well, in the original, God didn't create us as slaves to sin. God didn't create us with all the problems that we deal with. God didn't create us with all the weaknesses that every one of us has in one way or another. God didn't create us imperfect. When He created us, it was all good, but sin got in the way. We lost that relationship with God. We're living in a world and born into a body that's just not perfect. That's not the way it was intended to be, and it's not the way God's going to make it in the future when He returns and He makes everything right, and there's not going to be any more death, not going to be any more suffering, not going to be any more pain, and we're going to have new bodies. We're going to be in much better shape. But right now, God's not always satisfied with us. C.S. Lewis said, We don't like to look at God as if He's our father. We would rather look at God as if He's our grandfather. Because, your father will discipline you, but our grandfather just wants us to have fun. We look at God more like a granddad. And because we get comfortable with Him. And this morning I want to suggest there are some reasons, there are some real aspects about God. There are real things about God that we need to take seriously. Jesus said, "Come follow me." Follow me, He said. He didn't say, "Sit there, I'll be right back." He said, "Come follow me." And it's the idea that He's not satisfied with where we are, and we need to follow Him and learn from Him and to be right with Him. So whether we're looking at a tornado or a buffalo, we got to see them for what they are. They're a little bit dangerous. One's a force of nature, one's a wild animal. I think this morning is a good time for us to see God for who He is. See His holiness. Think about His power. Think about His righteousness. And just take that seriously. In our own relationship between ourselves and God, take that seriously. Because the Israelites had just seen how powerful God was, and it was sobering. And one of the things that you notice in the song in Exodus chapter 15 was that they started to see God as a warrior. They started to see Him as a warrior. And when we say that they saw God as a warrior, that sounds like I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I'm not. That's literally what they said. They said He's a warrior. In verse 3, it says very specifically, the Lord is a warrior. The Lord is His name. He goes on in the next few verses. It says, "And He threw Pharaoh's chariots and his army into the sea. And the elite of his officers were drowned in the Red Sea." They're singing this. Verse 5, it says, "The floods covered them, and they sank in the depths like a stone." Verse 6, it says, "Lord, your right hand is glorious in power. Lord, your right hand shattered the enemy." And in verse 7, he says, "You overthrew your adversaries by your great majesty. You unleashed your burning wrath. It consumed them like stubble." See, the thing about warriors is that warriors battle and warriors fight and warriors kill, and God had destroyed an entire military force. Warriors are by definition a little dangerous. We portray them most of the time as frightening. You're going to search for warrior online, you'll get, pictures like this. You don't want to be on the receiving end of a warrior. They're dangerous a little bit. Here's a warrior from Monty Python, right there. There's a warrior. The only reason, that's the killer bunny that was it. The only reason that's funny is because warriors don't look like little bunnies most of the time. When we portray warrior, we'll get pictures like this, We'll get frightening pictures of fighters who battle and kill. We don't often view God as frightening. But the Egyptian army did. His power was unstoppable. His power was overwhelming. They had no chance against him. When we saw the eclipse a few months ago, I don't know if you got to see the total eclipse. But the total eclipse, when the moon completely covered the sun, you can see the corona of the sun. And you can look at it you can take the glasses off at that moment, and you can just look at it because it's not harmful once it's in total eclipse. And as I was in West Plains and we took the glasses off and we looked up, you could see the corona, but you could also see an orange dot kind of toward the bottom of it. And that orange dot, I thought maybe that's a solar flare. It wasn't a solar flare, it was a solar prominence. It's like this gigantic loop of fire that's attached to the sun on both ends, but it makes this gigantic loop, and it comes way up, and they are so much bigger than even the entire planet Earth. They're so much bigger, they can stretch 200,000 miles away from the sun, and it's so bright and it's so big that you can see it with the naked eye from 93 million miles away on a total eclipse. I'm just in awe of the things that God has made. And the sun that God put in our solar system is not even close to the biggest star that He's made in the universe. We are dwarfed by the power of God, by His majesty. In Exodus chapter 22, verse 21, God tells them this. He says, you must not exploit a resident alien or oppress him, a resident alien, somebody living in the country that's not a citizen, but they're living in the country anyway. He says, you must not exploit a resident alien or oppress him, since you were resident aliens in the land of Egypt. He says in verse 22, you must not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them, they will no doubt cry to me, and I will certainly hear their cry. That's a little bit ominous. He says, my anger will burn, and I will kill you with the sword. Then your wives will be widows, and your children fatherless. He's telling them, you need to be right with God. You need to not be mistreating people who are helpless, not mistreating people who are in a tough position, not taking advantage of them, because God pays attention to that sort of thing. And when they cry out to Him, He's going to step in and He'll fight for them. And let me tell you, if God's fighting against you, you have no chance. God defends the helpless. He's going to bring justice to people who need it. To be right with God is not just about being in a religious ceremony, doing the right things on Sunday. To be right with God is to be the person that He wants you to be, to live the way He wants you to live, to seek justice for people around you and not be unjust to people around you, to pursue good instead of evil, to think of others and not merely think of ourselves. We want to be right with God so He doesn't come to someone else's defense and flatten us. He's a warrior. But they also saw God as the Creator. Because what He did at the Red Sea was He took what was His and He made it do whatever He wanted it to do. I don't know if you've ever rented a house instead of a hotel room, like an Airbnb. I think that's one thing you can call them. We did that a couple of times, and actually it's kind of fun. You can kind of get away from the world because you're in your own house there, or you're not yours, somebody else's, and you've got a lot of space, different bedrooms, but everybody's that's with you is sort of together. And the last time we did this, we were in Kansas City, and I just want you to know that when you rent an Airbnb, there's some things you don't do. Like for instance, Cheryl and I did not move any pictures or hang any new shelves. And it's a very simple reason, because it's not our house. We don't do that sort of thing because it wasn't our house. The owner gets to decide what to do with the house. And in this story, in Revelation 14 and 15, this is God's creation, and He's taking the water and He's doing what He wants to with it. And He's making the chariots that are going through for the Egyptians, He's making them come all apart. See, God can use a wind to part the Red Sea, like Exodus 14 says, a wind blew all night and forced the sea back. God's just using His creation. He's got total power over it because it's His. And it pictures it that way. In verse 8, it says that the water heaped up at the blast from your nostrils. It's a song. They're just making a metaphor. God just sent a wind all night, and they said it's just the blast of His nostrils. And the currents stood firm like a dam. The watery depths congealed in the heart of the sea. It says in verse 9, the enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire will be gratified at their expense. I will draw my sword. My hand will destroy them. They were creating injustice. They were going after God's people. But in verse 10 he says, but you blew with your breath and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. And if you skip down to verse 12, it says, you stretched out your right hand and the earth swallowed them. It's His creation. We are not living in a place that we made. We're living in a place that God made. And God controls the circumstances that are around us. He controls the events. He controls the weather. God can make things happen on the earth. He controls our life. He controls our heartbeat. It's all His. That's what the Israelites and Egyptians saw. God was the creator. It was all His. Reality itself has to bend to God's will. Jesus described how God won't even let a sparrow, a bird, hit the ground unless God allows it in Matthew chapter 10. So we trust in God to help us, but we also need to respect God as the creator, to respect His control over our future, to respect His control over our circumstances, to respect His control, so whether we're going through tough times or whether we're going through good times, to just know that we're not really in charge of everything that happens on this planet. He is, and so we give Him the respect as the creator. It's His place. He's the creator. He has the power. And last, we need to see God as God. Not only is He a warrior, not only is He the creator, but He's God. So this whole eternity thing kind of belongs to Him. He's got all knowledge. He's got all power. He's got His own divine, eternal purposes. The Bible says, for God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. He knows the end from the beginning. He already knows all of it. And in Exodus chapter 15, verse 13, the Bible says, with your faithful love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. You will guide them to your holy dwelling with your strength. If you skip down to verse 17, it says, you will bring them in and plant them on the mountain of your possession. Lord, you have prepared the place for your dwelling. Lord, your hands have established the sanctuary. And He says, Lord, you will reign forever and ever. I mean, He's just got these divine plans, these divine purposes for the entire world, for our life, for your life. He's got all of these things that God's going to do for all of eternity. He's not just the warrior. He's not just the creator. He's also God. He's also God. And as crazy as the world might seem at this moment today, when we look at the news and all of the horrible things that are going on, it looks exactly like the Bible said it would. He's in control of the direction that everything's going to go, and He's going to bring it to an end. He's going to establish His rule and eternity forever and ever. He's still God. Nothing that's going on the news is a surprise to Him. God established His people Israel in the Bible, and through them, Jesus entered the world. And through Jesus, everyone on earth today can be forgiven, can be reconnected with God. Everyone can be right with God. That message has gone out to the entire world, and in the future, God will bring it all to a close. I think sometimes we stress out over the world and all of the things that are going on, and we get so wrapped up in it, and it's good to remember that God is still on the throne. That in the end, He's working out His own purposes. That there's nothing that mankind is ever going to be able to do that's going to throw His purposes and His plan off track. That there's nothing that you've ever done, nothing that you'll ever do that's going to surprise Him or mess up His plans. He knew everything you were going to do before you ever did it, and He called you to follow Him anyway. He knew every wrong thing. He knew every sin. He knew every stumble. He knew every mistake. And He still cared about you enough that He wanted you to be here this morning on a Sunday morning at Parkview Christian Church in Springfield, Missouri, in the United States of America, so that you could hear that He loves you. He's got a plan for your life. And if you'll follow Him, He'll lead you where you need to go. He's God. He's just bigger than all of us. So I think it's good to see God as a warrior. I think it's good to see God as the creator. I think it's awesome to see God as God. To just take Him seriously. To be slow to judge others and to think that we're all that. To be careful about thinking that God is just like a grandfather who doesn't really care what we do. But to just give Him the respect, the honor, and the worship, and to be serious about being right with God. Paul, one time, he said it this way. He said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Work out your own salvation between you and God. Make sure you're right with Him. Do it with fear and trembling, respect and honor to God. Let me tell you, I don't know where you might be this morning and where God has got you in your life, but I invite you to spend these next few moments as we sing this song. And it's kind of a new song, so that's okay. You might not know it anyway. But while the song is going on, spend this time with God. Kind of make things right between you and Him. You know, talk to Him about your life a little bit. Let Him kind of open the eyes of your heart so that you can kind of maybe look at some of the things that you've been doing or the directions you've been going or maybe just some way that you've treated somebody else and let Him show you what His will is. Be right with Him. I invite you today to just spend this moment as we sing this song, to spend it with God. Let's stand, let's sing. And if you've never accepted Christ as your Lord and Savior, come meet me right up here. You can do that today.